The year 1989 was a watershed moment for the video game industry. It was a time of massive generational leaps, shifting paradigms, and the quiet evolution of personal computers into true gaming powerhouses. To understand how the landscape changed, we first have to look at the hardware driving personal computers. In April 1989, Intel introduced a piece of silicon that fundamentally changed what computers could do, the 80486 microprocessor. When Intel officially unveiled the 80486 microprocessor in April 1989, it did not represent a mere step forward in computing power. It was a colossal, industry-shaking leap. To understand the magnitude of this silicon behemoth, you have to look at the physical architecture. The 486 was the very first x86 processor to shatter the 1 million transistor barrier, packing roughly 1.2 million transistors onto a single piece of silicon. This was more than quadruple the density of its predecessor, the highly successful 80386. But Intel didn't just use those extra transistors to blindly increase clock speeds. They completely re-engineered how the processor handled data. One of the most critical architectural breakthroughs was the inclusion of an on-die Level 1 cache. Prior to 1989, processors had to constantly reach out to the system's slower main memory to retrieve instructions and data, creating a massive performance bottleneck. The 486 integrated 8 kilobytes of lightning-fast static RAM directly into the CPU core. By keeping the most frequently used data right next to the processor's calculation engine, the 486 virtually eliminated this wait time. Furthermore, Intel introduced a tightly integrated 5-stage instruction pipeline. This meant the processor could fetch, decode, and execute different parts of multiple instructions simultaneously. Because of these efficiencies, a 486 could execute many instructions in a single clock cycle, making it roughly twice as fast as a 386 running at the exact same megahertz. However, the most important innovation for the future of the video game industry was the integration of a floating point unit, or math coprocessor. Before the 486, complex decimal math, the exact type of heavy calculations required to calculate physics, trace lighting, and render three-dimensional geometry, was painfully slow unless you bought a completely separate, highly expensive coprocessor chip, like the 80387, to plug into your motherboard. With the 486, Intel baked the math coprocessor directly into the main die. Suddenly, high-speed floating-point mathematics became a standard baseline rather than a luxury add-on. While the 486 was initially priced at a premium and targeted strictly at high-end servers and professional workstations in 1989, forward-thinking game developers immediately understood the implications. This chip provided the raw, unadulterated horsepower required to break gaming out of the two-dimensional realm. The complex aerodynamics of hardcore flight simulators, the shifting terrain of voxel-based engines, and the textured, unshaded polygons that would soon define the 3D PC gaming revolution of the early 1990s were simply impossible on older hardware. The 486 provided the vital architectural foundation that would soon allow developers to build immersive, three-dimensional worlds, ultimately transforming the personal computer into the most powerful gaming platform on the planet. At the exact same time, the software landscape was preparing for a seismic shift. MS-DOS was the absolute standard for PC gaming, but Microsoft was busy behind the scenes finishing up Windows 3.0. Although it wouldn't officially hit retail shelves until early 1990, 1989 was the year the development kits were circulating, and the tech industry knew a massive change was coming. Windows 3.0 finally gave PC users a graphical interface that was pleasant to use, breaking the reliance on stark text commands. It introduced vastly improved memory management that allowed programs to break past the restrictive limits of older DOS environments. And it bundled a simple application called Solitaire.
By integrating a highly addictive card game right into the operating system, Windows 3.0 covertly turned millions of office workers and everyday computer users into gamers, proving that interactive entertainment wasn't just for hardcore enthusiasts.
Outside the realm of personal computers, 1989 was the year the home console market exploded with innovation. Nintendo completely revolutionized how and where we play games by releasing the Game Boy. It wasn't the first handheld console, but it was the one that perfected the formula. When Nintendo released the Game Boy in Japan in April 1989, and later that summer in North America, it didn't just introduce a new piece of hardware, it effectively birthed the modern portable gaming industry. Designed by legendary engineer Gunpei Yokoi and his R&D team, the Game Boy was built on a brilliant counterintuitive design philosophy known as lateral thinking with withered technology. In an era where tech companies were desperately racing to push the most cutting-edge, expensive hardware possible, Yokoi took the exact opposite approach. He believed that utilizing cheap, well-understood, and highly available components would lead to a more accessible, reliable, and fundamentally practical device. From a purely technical standpoint, the Game Boy was vastly underpowered compared to its looming, technologically superior competitors like the Atari Lynx or the Sega Game Gear. It featured a custom 8-bit sharp processor, completely lacked a backlight, and displayed graphics in exactly 4 murky shades of olive green on a 2.6-inch dot matrix LCD screen. But Yokoi's highly conservative hardware choices resulted in 2 absolute masterstrokes of consumer electronics: radical affordability and astonishing battery life. While competing full-color handhelds devoured batteries in a matter of 2 to 3 hours and cost an absolute fortune, the Game Boy could magically squeeze anywhere from 15 to 30 hours of continuous playtime out of 4 standard AA batteries. It was ruggedly built, it fit comfortably in a backpack or a large pocket, and it hit a price point that made it an easy holiday purchase. However, even the most practical hardware means nothing without the right software, and the Game Boy's dominance was ultimately sealed by a brilliant, aggressive licensing maneuver. While Nintendo initially planned to bundle the handheld with Super Mario Land to showcase their flagship mascot, game designer and publisher Hank Rogers convinced Nintendo of America to bundle a visually simple, Soviet-designed puzzle game instead, Tetris. Rogers famously argued that if Nintendo wanted to sell Game Boys to little boys, they should pack in Mario, but if they wanted to sell Game Boys to absolutely everyone, they needed Tetris. He was entirely right. The combination of the Game Boy's pure portability and the fiercely addictive, hypnotic loop of falling tetraminos created an unprecedented cultural explosion. It completely transcended traditional gaming demographics. Business executives were suddenly playing it on long flights, adults were playing it in waiting rooms, and kids were utilizing the system's revolutionary link cable to battle each other head-to-head on the playground. By intentionally sacrificing raw graphical power for unmatched convenience and securing the ultimate killer app, Nintendo's 1989 Gray Brick didn't just enter the handheld market, it conquered it entirely, laying a foundation that the company would dominate for decades to come. Looking back, 1989 wasn't just another year on the calendar. Between the raw processing power of the Intel 486, the incoming accessibility of Windows 3.0, the dawn of the 16-bit console era, and the birth of portable gaming as we know it, 1989 served as the blueprint for the modern video game industry. In the realm of role-playing games, 1989 delivered a title that completely redefined the scale and maturity of the genre with Sega's Phantasy Star II for the Genesis. At a time when most console RPGs were strictly adhering to medieval high fantasy tropes involving swords, dragons, and saving kidnapped princesses, Phantasy Star II offered a sprawling, dystopian science fiction epic.
Set on the terraformed planet of Mota, players were thrust into a complex world grappling with rogue biological experiments, oppressive planetary computers, and environmental collapse. The sheer scope of the adventure was staggering, housed on a massive 6-megabit cartridge, making it the largest console game ever produced at the time of its release. It wasn't just the sheer size of the game that left a lasting impact, it was the heavy narrative weight it carried. Phantasy Star II is heavily remembered for its notoriously punishing, labyrinthine dungeon designs and a shockingly dark, emotionally devastating storyline. It boldly featured the permanent, unpreventable death of a beloved main party character halfway through the adventure, a narrative risk that predated similar twists in later industry titans by nearly a decade. This wasn't a cheerful romp, it was a grueling futuristic saga filled with moral ambiguity and intense turn-based combat. By pushing the boundaries of what a console RPG could make players feel, Phantasy Star II cemented itself as a foundational masterpiece of the 16-bit era. While RPG fans were exploring distant planets on their couches, the arcades of 1989 were echoing with the clash of steel and the roar of dragons thanks to Sega's Golden Axe. Designed by Makoto Uchida, the visionary behind Altered Beast, Golden Axe took the side-scrolling beat-em-up formula popularized by games like Double Dragon and injected it with a heavy dose of gritty, Conan the Barbarian-style high fantasy. Players could step into the boots of 3 distinct warriors, the broadsword-wielding barbarian Axe Battler, the fierce Amazon Tyrus Flare, and the incredibly popular axe-wielding dwarf Gilius Thunderhead. Each character brought their own unique fighting style and spectacular screen-clearing magic attacks, which were fueled by kicking tiny fleeing thieves to steal their blue potion bottles. What truly made Golden Axe a standout experience in 1989, however, was its phenomenal cooperative gameplay and the innovative inclusion of mountable beasts. You could knock an enemy off a bizarre fire-breathing dragon or a strange scorpion-tailed creature, jump on its back, and use it to decimate the hordes of the evil Death Adder. The visceral satisfaction of the combat, combined with the beautifully detailed pixel art and a booming atmospheric orchestral soundtrack, made Golden Axe an absolute quarter-eater. It proved that the beat-em-up genre could successfully pivot from urban street brawls into epic fantasy realms, creating a franchise that defined Sega's arcade and home console legacy for years to come. Over on the Nintendo Entertainment System, 1989 proved that licensed games based on television shows didn't have to be cheap, poorly designed cash grabs. When Capcom released DuckTales, they didn't just deliver a good tie-in to the immensely popular Disney animated morning cartoon. They created one of the greatest 2D platformers in the entire history of the medium. Developed by key personnel who had worked on the legendary Mega Man series, DuckTales was exceptionally polished and mechanically brilliant. Instead of a traditional linear progression, players were given the freedom to select their destination from a globe-trotting control panel, guiding Scrooge McDuck through distinct, vibrant environments like the Amazon jungle, Transylvania, and even the moon in search of lost treasures. The absolute genius of the game, however, lay within its central traversal and combat mechanic, Scrooge's cane. By utilizing the cane as a makeshift pogo stick, players could bounce across spike-filled chasms, launch off the heads of enemies, and reach hidden areas with an incredibly satisfying sense of momentum and rhythm. It was a masterclass in tight, responsive platforming design. Furthermore, the game's presentation was flawless. It featured bright, expressive 8-bit sprites that perfectly captured the charm of the cartoon, and it was elevated by an absolutely legendary chiptune soundtrack. The music composed for the Moon level remains one of the most iconic, widely recognized pieces of video game music ever written. DuckTales set an impossibly high gold standard for licensed properties, proving that with the right development talent, a cartoon tie-in could achieve genuine gaming perfection. When Nintendo launched the Game Boy in 1989, they needed a killer app to prove that their pocket-sized, spinach-green screen could deliver a genuine console-quality experience. The result was Super Mario Land, a game that stands out as one of the most delightfully bizarre and fascinating entries in the entire Mario franchise. Because traditional Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto was busy with other projects, development was handed over to Game Boy hardware architect Gunpei Yokoi and his Nintendo R&D1 team. This shift in leadership resulted in a Mario adventure that felt completely alien compared to its NES predecessors. Instead of rescuing Princess Toadstool from Bowser in the Mushroom Kingdom, Mario traveled to the exotic realm of Sarasa Land to save Princess Daisy from an evil space alien named Tatanga. The traditional rules of the series were thrown entirely out the window. Koopa shells exploded like bombs instead of bouncing away. Fireballs bounced off walls and collected coins, and the game featured completely out-of-character side-scrolling shoot-'em-up levels where Mario piloted a submarine and an airplane. Despite its weirdness, or perhaps because of it, Super Mario Land was an absolute masterclass in portable game design. The sprites were tiny to accommodate the small screen, but the controls were incredibly tight, and the music was wonderfully catchy. It sold over 18 million copies, single-handedly proving that massive, compelling platforming adventures could be successfully shrunk down to fit directly into your pocket. While console gamers were stomping Goombas, personal computer users were experiencing a quantum leap in animation and cinematic storytelling with Jordan Mechner's Prince of Persia. Released initially for the Apple II in 1989, this game completely shattered existing conventions of how a video game character could move and interact with their environment. To achieve this unprecedented level of realism, Mechner utilized a painstaking technique called rotoscoping. He filmed his younger brother running, jumping, and climbing in white clothing, and then meticulously traced over the footage frame by frame to create the game's sprites. The result was a shockingly fluid, incredibly lifelike protagonist whose movements possessed a genuine sense of weight and momentum. But Prince of Persia was far more than just a brilliant technical tech demo. It was a grueling, tense, and atmospheric masterpiece of game design. Players were thrown into a perilous dungeon and given exactly 60 real-time minutes to escape, defeat the evil Vizier Jafar, and save the princess. The dungeons were absolutely ruthless, filled with deadly falling floor tiles, hidden spike traps, and brutal sword fights that required careful parrying and strategic strikes rather than mindless button mashing. Every single jump had to be calculated, and every mistake carried immense consequence. By combining breathtaking animation with a ticking clock and realistic physics, Prince of Persia practically invented the cinematic platformer genre, laying the vital groundwork for future industry giants. After polarizing fans with the cryptic, non-linear role-playing elements of Simon's Quest, Konami returned the Castlevania franchise to its hardcore action platforming roots in 1989 with Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse. This title didn't just return to form, it pushed the aging hardware of the Nintendo Entertainment System to its absolute breaking point, delivering what many considered to be the crowning achievement of the 8-bit era. Serving as a prequel to the original game, players took control of Trevor Belmont, the ancestor of Simon, as he waged war against Dracula. What truly separated Dracula's Curse from every other action game on the market was its unprecedented level of ambition and player choice. For the first time in the series, the game featured branching, non-linear paths, allowing players to choose their own route through Transylvania to reach the Dark Lord's castle. Furthermore, Trevor didn't have to fight alone. Depending on the path chosen, players could recruit and actively swap between 3 entirely different companion characters: the agile pirate Grant Dynasty, who could climb walls; the powerful sorceress Sypha Belnadez, who wielded devastating elemental magic; and Dracula's own son Alucard, who could transform into a bat to bypass obstacles. This mechanic gave the game an incredible amount of replay value and strategic depth. Accompanied by a legendary sweeping Gothic soundtrack and incredibly detailed atmospheric stage design, Castlevania III offered a dark, sweeping epic that remains one of the greatest side-scrolling action games ever produced.
While Nintendo and Sega's Genesis were dominating the headlines, the Sega Master System played host to one of the most ahead-of-its-time action-adventure games ever conceived, Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap. Developed by Westzone in 1989, this brilliantly crafted title practically laid the blueprint for the Metroidvania genre of exploration-based platformers. The game kicks off with a brilliant subversion of expectations. You start fully powered up, storming a castle to defeat the Mecha Dragon. However, upon landing the killing blow, you're hit with a terrible curse that strips away your armor and transforms you into a fire-breathing lizard man. From there, the true genius of the game reveals itself. The Dragon's Trap abandons linear level progression in favor of a massive, interconnected world filled with hidden secrets, shops, and unreachable areas. To cure your curse, you must defeat other dragons scattered across the land, each of which forces you to transform into a completely different animal form. Players have to master the wall-clinging abilities of Mouse Man, the underwater swimming of Piranha Man, the devastating vertical attacks of Lion Man, and the flight of Hawk Man. Each new form acts as a literal and figurative key, opening up entirely new pathways and encouraging constant backtracking through beautifully drawn, vibrant 8-bit environments. Featuring a robust password save system to accommodate its massive length, incredibly tight platforming mechanics, and a deeply rewarding sense of progression, Wonder Boy 3 remains an absolute marvel of 1989 game design that was years ahead of its competition. While Nihon Falcom initially released the action role-playing game Ys 2 for Japanese microcomputers in 1988, it was in 1989 that the title made a monumental technological leap that would permanently alter the trajectory of the medium. In December 1989, Hudson Soft compiled the first two games and released Ys 1 and 2 for the PC Engine CD-ROM 2 in Japan. This wasn't just a simple enhanced port, it was an awe-inspiring demonstration of what the future of video games would look, and more importantly, sound like. By abandoning the strict storage limitations of cartridges and floppy disks for the vast expanse of a compact disc, the developers created an experience that felt genuinely cinematic. Ys 2 picks up exactly where the first game left off, following the red-haired swordsman Adol Christin as he is magically transported to the mythical floating continent of Ys. The core gameplay retained the series' famously fast-paced bump combat system, where players actively attack enemies by ramming into them off-center at high speeds. However, Ys 2 evolved the formula dramatically by introducing a robust magic system. The addition of a fireball spell completely transformed the game's flow, turning incredibly difficult screen-filling boss encounters into thrilling games of ranged strategy, spatial awareness, and rapid evasion. However, the true reason the 1989 CD-ROM release of Ys 2 is etched into gaming history is its unprecedented presentation. The new optical format allowed for beautiful, fully voiced anime-style cutscenes, an absolute rarity that left contemporary players completely speechless. Even more groundbreaking was the soaring Red Book audio soundtrack. The sweeping, electric guitar-driven orchestral arrangements of legendary tracks like To Make the End of Battle proved that video game music could transcend simple synthesized bleeps and bloops to become genuine high-fidelity art.
In 1989, Ys 2 didn't just deliver a thrilling, emotional conclusion to a beloved RPG saga, it served as the ultimate proof of concept for the incoming CD-ROM revolution, showing the entire industry that the next generation of gaming would be a massive multimedia experience.